And at 10, 8 Aunt May and Mary Jane. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from Evil Dead was actually what caused it. But after learning that the plague was actually like a bad thing, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and MJ the hell out of Dodge. But when he gets there, we get a good old case of protagonist syndrome and boom! Zombie Spider. He ends up becoming a zombie and eats the two most important people in his life. He also had a fractured jaw before becoming a zombie, so I'm sure you can imagine that this isn't a pretty sight, even by zombie standards. It may not be our Pete, but it was a version of Spider-Man, so it's fine. And at 9, Anna Marconi. Speaking of a version of Spider-Man, let's discuss the Superior Spider-Man and his fascination with Anna Marconi. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter, yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body, which convinced Otto to end up becoming a hero, albeit a darker one. Doc Ock was up to some really shady stuff while pretending to be Peter, cause you know, since Peter is young, handsome, in shape, and has actual women in his life, Otto tried his luck at getting MJ to sleep with him, but failed miserably. So, you know, things weren't going that well. But then there's Anna Marconi, whom this Otto-Peter hybrid started dating. She had no idea what the real situation was going on inside that noggin, and while it's unclear if they ever actually hopped on the good foot and did the bad thing, it's obvious that things were at least heading in that direction. Otto was in love with her, which was a surprise since he even decided to give Peter back his body to save her, but it was still an absolutely horrific story, immoral, in the highest class of the word. It's creepy as hell and it makes me rethink all relationships. And at 8, interfered with surgery. In the same series as the Anna Marconi situation, the small bit of Peter that was left in his body was trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because you know, a super villain was piloting his bone mech with meat armor. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Pete from Otto's brain, but to get it he had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto could do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, while he has his Spider-Man mask on, may I add, and an additional face mask, so if evil Spider-Man can do it, so can you. Even still, trying to prevent the surgery to save a little girl's life is a pretty low moment for the Barnacle, even if it was filled with good intentions. Kind of. Those only power crystals, you know. Actually, is that how it works? I don't know. I don't think like Topaz is gonna cure my depression or something. And in 7, scarring Harry Osborn. While Spider-Man 3 in and of itself is one of the most despicable things that Spider-Man has done, well, with the exception of that sweet dance scene, one of the most horrible things actually in the movie is during the final fight between Harry and Peter. Peter shows up at Harry's house wearing the black symbiote costume and is mad about Goblin Jr. being the reason that MJ left Peter. However, this fight is about more than that, since Harry still blames Peter for killing his father, and Peter is done trying to convince him. After wailing on him a little bit, Peter kicks Harry into the path of a rogue glider, sending him flying into a shelf of good old-fashioned pumpkin bombs. After some mental torment, he knocks Harry out against the wall, at least so he thinks. But in fact, Harry is awake, and as Peter is walking away, Harry decides to chuck a pumpkin bomb at Pete, who dodges it thanks to his spider sense, but then thanks to the symbiote throws it back at Harry, causing it to explode basically right next to his face. If it weren't for the Goblin serum, Harry would definitely be dead, and honestly, even with it, I'm surprised that he survived. But you do have to admit, it was pretty damn cold, but Harry also did kind of deserve it. And at 6, assorted killings. For being a hero that has a strict no killing rule, Spider-Man has killed quite a few people, but perhaps most notably Logan's friend Charlie, in the graphic novel Spider-Man vs. Wolverine from 1987. The plot of this is that both Wolverine and Spidey end up in Berlin for their own reasons, and as the title suggests, Wolverine and Spider-Man end up fighting each other, in a graveyard to be exact. The fight is actually a good one, with Spidey even having the mindset to kill Wolverine because Logan might kill him first. They don't know each other that well at this point. The fight ends only when a helicopter of bad guys shows up looking for Logan's friend Charlie. Wolverine wanted to help his friend stop killing, but now since this helicopter showed up, Wolverine wants to kill her quick, since, you know, they aren't going to. Which he doesn't actually have to do because Spider-Man does. After Charlie intentionally sets off his spider sense and gets a super-powered spider punch to the face, killing her instantly. Halfway through and in number 5, kissed Gwen's daughter. After learning that your father isn't actually your father, but rather your mother's ex who she cheated on with his worst enemy, what do you think you would do? Also, you're aging more rapidly because your real father has some form of goblin serum in his system that somehow passed on to you, but you only age up physically, so you're mentally 10 with the body of an adult. yeah, you may want to skip this number. Since Pete and Sarah end up getting closer after fighting off dealers in Paris, but this was made even worse when they're in Paris without MJ, who Peter didn't bring for whatever reason. The thing is though, Peter thinks that this is entirely platonic. This just goes to show you that if your partner thinks that someone's trying to get with you, you should listen. Because lo and behold, Sarah ends up planting one on her almost dad, just as MJ shows up for a surprise visit. And I think the name of the storyline, Sins Remembered, is way too fitting and is definitely going to be seared into my brain now. God damn it. You thought that Gwen and Green Goblin was bad? Oh boy. And it forestalled his marriage. After siding with Tony in the events of the first Civil War, Spider-Man has to reveal his identity to the world in order to continue fighting crime. And you know, since now every supervillain on Earth knows how to get to Spider-Man, Kingpin ends up attacking Peter at his home. He dodges the bullets, but they end up hitting Aunt May instead, putting her in critical condition. This is the start of the One More Day storyline, probably the most universally hated Spider-Man run of all time. Since in order to save Aunt May, Peter talks to Mephisto and ends up selling his marriage to MJ in order to save his aunt. So their entire marriage will get erased so that he can have at least one more day with his aunt. Aside from living with the consequences of your actions, because you know, that's not what heroes do. Which is also pretty goddamn horrible. You wanna know what else is pretty goddamn horrible? Like, MJ had to agree to it as well, or at least she had to say that she did. But like, seriously, if you're being realistic, okay, how many years does Aunt May really have left? Okay, like, honestly, not many. So selling your marriage to bring back your one foot in the grave aunt just seems like a not so even trade to me. I'm just saying. MJ's gonna be around for longer. You heard it right, ladies. I'd let my old aunt die for you. Hit me up. Getting close to the end into number 3, One Moment in Time. The One Moment in Time story comes after the One More Day story, and this seems to be the storyline that No Way Home is taking inspiration from. However, after saving Aunt May, Wilson Fisk ends up sending a hitman after MJ's Aunt Anna Watson, but the hitman, revealed to be Eddie Brock, ends up attacking Mary Jane. Peter takes the wounded MJ to Doctor Strange, who heals her, but Peter also insists that Doctor Strange performs a spell that causes everyone to forget that he's Spider-Man, because again, not living with the consequences of his actions. Strange contacts Iron Man and Mr. Fantastic for advice, and they end up agreeing with him eventually. They do, however, decide that nobody should remember who Peter is aside from Peter. Not Doctor Strange, not Tony, not Mr. Fantastic, not MJ. But Peter, being Peter, jumps out of his protective bubble and grabs MJ and pulls her in before the spell is complete. They wake up in a motel and Peter explains what happened. Mary Jane asks why he couldn't just let her forget, and then she explains that she can't be with him because it's only a matter of time before somebody rips off his mask again and they go after her family, and that's a danger that she can't let happen. Back in the present though, Mary Jane also explains that he has to move on and find somebody who can be with him. Should have just let her forget it, man. Penultimately, into number 2, hit Mary Jane. To get things straight, I understand that finding out that you're actually a clone and that the real Peter Parker has been living his life for the past few years as Ben Reilly because he thought he was the clone would be pretty earth-shattering, but nonetheless, it doesn't excuse this behavior. You may be under a lot of stress, but you never hit or take it out on your partner in any way whatsoever. No matter what gender you are or aren't, you just don't, okay? But Peter didn't get that memo for a minute, since in the Clone Wars storyline after finding this out, Peter and Ben are in the middle of a scrap. Mary Jane admittedly doesn't make the brightest move though when she attempts to break the two up, but Peter instinctively backhands her across the room, a moment we see referenced in Spider-Man 3 in the cafe that MJ works at. However, in the comic, Mary Jane was actually currently pregnant with his child, and while Peter does instantly regret this and is filled with shame and guilt, he runs away. He doesn't check on his pregnant wife. He flees and joins up with Jackal, so yeah. Not the finest moment there, dude. Finally, into number 1, killed Mary Jane. I know I say I hate talking about this, but honestly, if I have to suffer through this knowledge, so does everyone else. It's like my own way of being a supervillain. In the Spider-Man Reigns storyline, it's revealed that Mary Jane is dead, but it's also revealed later on why she's dead, since she was married to Peter, and as I've mentioned, did eventually want to have kids with him. The thing is though, a radioactive spider biting your hand does more to a man than lets him stick to walls and perform incredible acrobatics. It also fills that man with radiation, and anything else he feels also gets filled with radiation, if you catch my drift. Whether you're role-playing a lab experiment or not, that's what ended up happening after all, since Mary Jane ends up dying of cancer thanks to the radiation that Peter was packing in those swimmers. Yeah, it's absolutely horrible, and while yes, it's a question that everyone had, it's not something we ever wanted an answer to, especially if this is the way that it was gonna go. And a 10 an affair. Now, Betty Brant got married in Amazing Spider-Man number 156 and headed off to Paris for a honeymoon that doubled as a work assignment for her and her new husband, reporter Ned Leeds. However, in Amazing Spider-Man issue 183, we see Peter propose to Mary Jane and her turn him down, which puts him in a pretty dark place, which means that when Betty shows up in Peter's apartment in Amazing Spider-Man 184, there are going to be some issues. However, Betty claims to have left Ned on their honeymoon, while also on assignment together. But here's the biggest kicker. She never told Ned that she was leaving him, but she still intends on sparking a romantic relationship with Peter, which he ends up shutting her down in number 186, telling her that he can't be with her. But she doesn't take no for an answer, and in issue 187 makes her own move and just goes for the kiss, saying, "Shut up darling, just kiss me." The next panel then cuts to a few hours later, which sparked the debate whether he and Betty actually ended up bumping more than lips. And then Ned ends up threatening to kill Peter if he doesn't stay out of Betty's life, so yeah. And at 9, failed Gwen. There are multiple instances of Spider-Man failing Gwen Stacy, both in the comics and in the movies. The more recent moment being in Amazing Spider-Man 2 starring Andrew Garfield. In both instances, Gwen Stacy is killed thanks to the Green Goblin, although in the comics it was debated for ages whether or not Peter was to blame, since he could have been the reason her neck snapped. It was also debated whether or not she was dead before the plummet, but I think we can all agree that she fell for him. She fell head over heels. And this idea that it was Peter's fault was only added onto in The Amazing Spider-Man, since the only reason Gwen was there was because Peter couldn't stay away from her, because he didn't give his blood to Harry, and then because he was relying more on his webs than his physical ability as Spider-Man. But at least the Tobey Maguire version didn't end up having any issues with Gwen Stacy, right? Oh wait. And at 8, kissed Gwen. While the comic version and the second movie version ended up getting their Gwens killed, Tobey's version ended up saving his when she fell out of a building in Spider-Man 3. Doing this even earned him the key to the city. And while a lot of the bad things that Peter does in this movie can be written off as the symbiote, at this point, Peter hasn't gotten it yet. So, when at the ceremony, when he was going to get to the key to the city, he decided to go the extra mile and let Gwen kiss him while he was hanging upside down. That's entirely on him. Something that Mary Jane, his current girlfriend, who was also at the ceremony and knew his identity, didn't enjoy. Especially because firstly, that was like their kiss theme, because like it was the kiss that they had after he saved her in the first movie. And secondly, because she left J. Jonah Jameson's son at the altar for Peter, and then this man goes and kisses another girl right in front of her doing their thing. Yeah, that's a total move. That a horrible idea. As an empath, I know how MJ was feeling in that instance, but I really don't get why he thought that this was a good idea. Like, yeah, sure, the papers will love it, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. You aren't even getting pictures of this to sell to JJ, so like, what's the point of pissing off your girl? Horrible move overall. And at 7, almost killed Shocker. The 90s animated series for Spider-Man has a lot going for it. I love the series and have watched it many times. In fact, I'm watching it right now again. But the things this Peter did while using the symbiote suit are kind of messed up. For instance, JJJ ends up putting up a bounty on him for accusations of thievery. But when people start using sonic weapons, he ends up trying to blow them up. There is literally a line where he says, "My suit has cruise control, but your suits have backpacks that blow up when they get wet." Yeah, well, he then breaks a fire hydrant to shower them with water, which basically would have killed them if they didn't run away. He also almost killed Shocker during their battle at the church, just before Brock becomes Venom and Peter loses the symbiote. He saves him just in the nick of time, but it's certainly not a good look for a show that will really only say destroy and not kill. Like, the Punisher comes in and they say lethal force, and then that's it. And then like one episode, Spider-Man says that the Spot doesn't look like a killer, but that's the only time they have anything close to the word kill. I mean, like, I get it, like it was the 90s and they didn't really go that dark, but still. And at 6, the Ferry. While attempting to stop a weapons deal, Spider-Man gets into a fight with a Vulture that nearly destroys a ferry full of people in Spider-Man Homecoming. And while it was totally meant to be like the most innocent thing, it certainly wasn't a smart idea. Honestly, Spider-Man should have just thrown the weapon into the ocean as a way to stop it instead of webbing it onto the boat. But technically, I guess he didn't know what it could do, but it was also still firing on its own when no one was holding it, which should have been enough warning that this wouldn't end well. However, he webs an energy weapon to the ground and then it splits the ferry in half. He does his best to save it, but only ends up being 98% successful. Like, it was working until some dude gets a little too excited and starts clapping and breaking the webbing, which wouldn't really be Peter's fault. But then when the webs start to break, Pete just kind of like sits there and watches and doesn't really try to repair anything. He eventually jumps in to try to grab one web, but like plenty had broken before this, so he should have kept going. As soon as she said 98% successful, you go out and you do it again. Like, come on, bro. Halfway through into number 5, tried to kill Sandman. This is something from Spider-Man 3 that we could consider to be because of the symbiote. However, considering how Peter wanted to kill the guy he thought killed his uncle when he first got his powers, I don't think the symbiote has much to do with this instance of him wanting his uncle's killer dead either. Sure, he's a little more aggressive about it. Like, without the suit, he probably would have asked a couple questions first, but I think that ultimately the fact that he wanted his uncle's killer dead was the driving force behind this. I mean, like, the suit definitely made him like really go for it, but he wanted it. Obviously, he doesn't end up actually killing Marco, but he certainly thought he did. He was proud of it too, even telling Aunt May, who he won't even tell that he's Spider-Man to, despite not living at home anymore and her being attacked by enemies multiple times, and then getting mad at him when he runs off because he has some Spider-Manning to do. He really only snaps out of it when Aunt May tells him that what Spider-Man did was pretty messed up. But like, I feel like she kind of like knew. Like, she was like, yeah, that's up, man. Spider-Man shouldn't have done that. Do you think that this version of Aunt May knew that he was Spider-Man, or do you think that she was oblivious? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. In it for Broken Promise. Okay, spoiler alert for No Way Home, since I feel like I still need to give a warning about it, even though the movie was released last year. So for this and number 2, there's a Spider-Man No Way Home warning in effect. Okay, if you haven't seen it, go do that, because it's an amazing movie. But the ending had me wailing. So as we know in the climax of the movie, spoiler alert, at the Statue of Liberty, we see the multiverse crack open and everyone who ever knew that Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker is now coming through. So in an effort to stop this from happening, Peter tells Doctor Strange to cast a new spell, this time that makes everyone forget about Peter Parker, including Doctor Strange, his best friend, and his girlfriend. In this case being Ned and MJ, not Doctor Strange's best friend and girlfriend. Peter goes to say goodbye and tells his friends that he will find them and remind them of everything they've been through. MJ says that she loves him and then tells him to say it when he finds her after the spell. The spell is cast, and then Peter just doesn't remind MJ and Ned because he thinks that they're safer without him. While this ending is perfect and sets up a new trilogy where the main complaint of him being Iron Boy Jr. is gone, it still breaks my heart. It's like this is like the same thing that happens at the end of my favorite book. So yeah, the Broken Promise thing, on my list for sure. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, threatened Kingpin. Spider-Man was in a weird place during the Civil War arc at Marvel Comics. After revealing his identity to the public, he was at odds with Tony Stark over the Superhuman Registration Act, which made Peter a wanted man. On the run, Peter, Aunt May, and MJ ended up hiding in a rundown motel while he was a fugitive. However, the Kingpin ended up hiring a hitman to put a hit on Spider-Man. It resulted in Aunt May accidentally being shot instead, leaving her critically injured. Peter would give her a blood transfusion, and while she was in a coma, he went after Wilson Fisk. Peter confronted the mob boss in a prison and gave him a fate worse than death. He defeated him in front of everyone. Peter beat the absolute living snot out of Kingpin, like absolutely to a pulp, but refused to kill him at the moment because he realized that a supervillain living with everyone knowing he can be beaten, especially Kingpin, was better than ending his life. But also mentioned that if Aunt May did die from this, he would come back and fill his lungs with webbing and watch him suffocate, which is incredibly dark, but also kind of makes sense. I'm surprised he didn't say something like, I will pull your face off your body by just not stopping the sticking of my hand to your bald head. But hey, I guess that's just my thinking. That's what I would do. Penultimately, in number 2, bitter. Again, another spoiler warning for Spider-Man No Way Home. However, this time around, it isn't about the MCU Peter Parker, rather Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. Thanks to the multiverse and the return of the Amazing Spider-Man actor, we got to see how Andrew's Spider-Man went on after the death of Gwen Stacy. And while the writers wanted to focus on Tom's Spider-Man rather than the other two, and not let them steal the show, which the actors agreed to, we still got some more story about where Andrew and Tobey went after their series completed. One such reveal was that Andrew's Peter stopped pulling his punches and got bitter. Heaven heavily implying that his Spider-Man ended up killing someone, be it intentional or not, which some have also linked to the Morbius trailer, since there is graffiti in one of the scenes with the word murderer spray painted over Sam Raimi's Spider-Man suit. However, that pose is also from a loading screen in Spider-Man PS4, so it's safe to assume that it's just a placeholder for the actual movie, potentially to prevent any spoiler about what happened to the Spideys after their movies concluded. Do you want to see an Amazing Spider-Man 3 where like he fights Venom or something? I don't know, let me know down below, I kinda do. And finally, into number 1, Spider-Carnage. Spider-Carnage isn't just the Spider-Man villain, he's actually an alternate version of Spider-Man. Hailing from one of the many Earths, this character was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. Again, my favorite Spider-Man animated series. This Peter's life was actually very similar to the main Spider-Man, except his version also lost Aunt May and developed a resentment for humanity. And then he had to deal with a clone, which definitely sucked. Until he and the clone learned that they didn't know who was actually the clone. Cause like, you know, the one going by Ben Reilly could have actually been the real Peter Parker. And this broke this version of Peter, who was actually still Peter. A Carnage symbiote from another universe actually ended up sensing this hatred and resentment for humanity, and through a portal created by Jonathan Ohm, it bonded with Peter, driving him even more insane and then starting to call himself Spider-Carnage. From my understanding, this character hasn't been seen since that final episode, but I still want him to like come back in some aspect because this is so messed up but so good. Please, like add this character to the MCU or let Andrew Garfield fight a version of the Carnage symbiote and then create Spider-Carnage or fight off Spider-Carnage or something, please. He wanted to fight an alien, so can we please do that? Please. Also, where's the pop figure? They came out with 90s Spider-Man pop figures, but not Spider-Carnage? What the hell?
Number 10. First appearance, first defeat. During his very first appearance, Vulture ended up being defeated. He first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 2, and ended that first story he appeared in during the first half of the comic, of course, in prison. Vulture here manages to catch Spider-Man unawares the first time they meet, and even kinda captures him. However, Spider-Man escapes and later outsmarts Vulture, realizing that he relies on his wing gadgetry to soar and really has no powers of his own and is just kind of an old guy. Spider-Man creates a device which disables Vulture's wings. Next time the two encounter one another, he uses it during the fight and handily defeats Vulture just like that, clipping the old man's wings and leaving that bird to be caged. Sorry, Adrian. Number 9. Spotter needed. When it comes to Miles Morales' first trip out as Spider-Man, it was embarrassing for both Miles and the first villain he encountered on patrol, Kangaroo. Miles was wearing a Spider-Man costume after Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, had died, and a lot of onlookers felt that this costume was in bad taste because of this. Miles also struggled somewhat with this instigation. He was just kind of getting the hang of his powers. But he got the final punch in his fight against Kangaroo, who had hoisted a car over his head and was about to throw it at Miles. Miles' punch to Kangaroo's chest causes him to drop the car on his own head, making him kinda knock himself out. How embarrassing. Don't worry, Miles does kick him away to safety, so at least he doesn't get crushed by that car. You should always be careful when lifting heavy objects. Case in point. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you love when villains get embarrassed, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Inferior Superior. One of the most embarrassing defeats for Otto Octavius around has to be when Spider-Man's heroism and Otto's kinda lack thereof made him realize that despite being called Superior Spider-Man, Otto, who was in Peter Parker's body at the time, was not actually capable of saving the day here. He needed Peter's help. This caused Otto to relinquish the body he stole back to Peter Parker, who still had a remaining consciousness left within it. Surrendering, Otto would later show back up in a clone of Peter's body, but would eventually go back to being the regular old Doc Ock in the end. Stick to what you're best at, maybe, is the moral here. Although I won't lie, I did enjoy watching Superior Spider-Man thwip around the city, beating baddies in Spider-Man's place. There were some things he was pretty good at, but this just wasn't one of them. It was a neat time in the comics. Number 7. Rejected. We've seen this tactic used a few times to beat Venom. Initially, Spider-Man was the one whom the Venom symbiote wanted the most. Spider-Man was initially depicted as the first host and has been the symbiote's first host in a few different versions of the tale. Although in the comics, Venom now has like a whole back history like before Spider-Man, so yeah. that is a thing that happened. In the Spectacular Spider-Man animated show, the fact that Peter is the first host remains to be the true narrative, as well as in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, or the Raimiverse as well actually. In the Spectacular Spider-Man animated show, it's this connection to Spider-Man that Peter uses in order to defeat the symbiote. He creates a rift between Eddie and the Venom symbiote by offering himself to be the symbiote's host, suggesting that the Venom symbiote, never really wanted to be with Eddie and that he was basically kinda like a rebound for them. When the Venom symbiote decides to leave Eddie, this is seemingly confirmed, hurting their relationship. After bonding to Peter, they also learn that Peter was lying and didn't actually want to be with them. And while trying to make Peter be their one and only, he ends up being protected by the memories and mental manifestations of those he loves within his consciousness. You can't make someone love you. Sorry, Venom. You can try, but it's not gonna work. Number 6. Surprise Spider-Man. Surprise! It's Spider-Man! In Superior Spider-Man issue number 31, we get to see Spider-Man embarrass Green Goblin when his return surprises him. You see, Norman thinks that Spider-Man is actually Superior Spider-Man, aka Otto Octavius, but Spider-Man reveals that it's not Otto driving this time around, and that Peter Parker is truly Spider-Man once more. And of course, you know what that means. Green Goblin is going down, and Spider-Man is going to make fun of his man purse while he does it. Of course, Peter himself is also surprised to find Norman has changed his face, but this doesn't prevent him from kicking Green Goblin's butt, helping to free Otto's love, Anna Maria, and save the day. Number 5. A not so shocking defeat. Of course, Shocker is generally considered to be a B or even C-list Spider-Man villain, and as a result he gets made fun of a lot in the comics normally. But it's somehow even more embarrassing in the Ultimate Universe. In issue number 8 of Ultimate Spider-Man, the issue opens with Spider-Man taking on Shocker and making embarrassingly quick work of him, asking who exactly he's supposed to be, the vibrator? Because yeah, the shock he's emitting is pretty weak. The other hilarious point here is that Spider-Man then turns the shock back on the Shocker, jamming his guns and basically causing him to shock himself. Ouch. Number 4. Watch your step. This embarrassing defeat comes to us from the pages of issue 230 of the Amazing Spider-Man comic. In this two-part story, Spider-Man took on the unstoppable power of the Juggernaut. While physically Peter struggled, Spider-Man eventually figured out a way to put a stop to Juggernaut without having to try and match his strength. Instead, he jumped on his head and he covered his eyes. Because they were fighting in a construction site, as Juggernaut flailed around trying to basically get the spider off his head, he accidentally stumbled into some wet cement, sinking down deep and finding himself trapped. So apparently take Juggernaut's eyesight away and he'll basically defeat himself because he's so clumsy. At least that's how it went down this time. Spider-Man of course just leapt to safety after Juggernaut was confirmed as stuck, taking the opportunity to make fun of all of his clumsiness. Poor Juggernaut. Stumblefoot, I think that's what he calls him. You Stumblefoot. Number 3. Back in Black. During the events of the Back in Black storyline, Peter dons his old black costume while trying to hunt down the person responsible for shooting Aunt May. He ends up discovering that Kingpin was behind the hit. In truth, it had actually been a hit put on Peter Parker after it was revealed that he was Spider-Man, but Aunt May was shot instead by accident. As Aunt May lay in the hospital fighting for her life, Peter decided to pay Kingpin a visit in prison. Not caring about his identity any longer, he even removed the top half of his suit, wanting Kingpin to know that this is Peter Parker fighting him, not Spider-Man. Peter brutally beats Kingpin up, humiliating him in front of the other inmates. The whole point is to show Kingpin just how strong Peter is and how he could easily kill Fisk, should he want to. He leaves Kingpin just barely alive to live with the humiliation of what happened, but does warn if Aunt May dies, then he'll be back to finish the job. Considering Fisk is all about being the strongest, most powerful guy in the room, this whole fight would be pretty embarrassing for him. Number 2. Hubris. A lot of Spider-Man's villains carry a certain kind of pride around when it comes to taking on Spidey. They often see themselves as better than Spider-Man, which is how they know they are sure to win. They also often see themselves as better than each other as well. and yet often they don't end up winning. One of the most embarrassing and smartest defeats occurred when one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains had his ego used against him. Yep, we're talking about Norman Osborn. At this point in time, Norman was actually also bonded to the Carnage symbiote, turning him into the villain that we would refer to as Red Goblin. While together, these two seemed pretty unstoppable. Armed with both the Goblin's serum powers and Carnage's power set, Spider-Man managed to defeat Osborn by getting him to ditch the symbiote. Got in his head, and all it took was taunting Norman to do this, implying that a victory while bonded to the Carnage symbiote would be more a victory for the symbiote than Norman himself, and implying that Osborn couldn't beat Spider-Man alone. This prompted Norman to ditch Carnage, which of course resulted in him being defeated by Spider-Man and company. But really, Spider-Man. Number 1. Defeated by laughter. And of course this list would not be complete if we did not mention one of the most embarrassing defeats of all time, and just in general, most embarrassing villains. Aw, sorry Peter. Paste Pot Pete. This one went down during the Spider-Man Human Torch team-up series in issue number 1. Here, Paste Pot Pete is attempting to get revenge on the Human Torch, aka Johnny Storm, when he runs into Spider-Man. Spider-Man doesn't even fight this poor guy, he just defeats him by embarrassing him. When Peter Petruski reveals his intent and his villainous name of Paste Pot Pete, Spider-Man reacts not by attacking him, but by falling to the ground, laughing at the idea of his ridiculous villain name. Paste Pot Pete ends up just walking away, deciding he should probably change his name. Later on, he would become Trapster, which is a lot better, but still not great in terms of villain names that, you know, aren't ridiculous in some way.
First off, we have Spider-Man's infamous deal with the devil in the super controversial storyline One More Day, featuring the demonic villain Mephisto. While a lot of the entries on this list deal with alternate universe versions of Peter Parker that have gone to the dark side, the Marvel 616 universe Spider-Man has had his fair share of dark mistakes as well. After Aunt May was mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet and all other forms of magical intervention had been exhausted, Peter is approached by Mephisto in the guise of a little girl who offers to save Aunt May in exchange for one thing: Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. While Peter and MJ had noble reasons for accepting the deal, making contracts with demons is definitely a more villainous action than most heroes would take, and has led to many unforeseen consequences in Spider-Man's life ever since. In another example of the mainstream Marvel Universe's Spidey crossing a dark line, number 9 has gotta be when he fought with Daredevil to try and kill Sin Eater. Guilty of having killed Peter's one friend on the police force, Captain Jean DeWolf, Sin Eater was beyond redemption in Spider-Man's eyes, and was nearly beaten to death before Daredevil intervened. And while eventually Peter was able to see reason, he was on the verge of beating a man to death, showing just how blurry the line between supervillainry and superheroics can be. Coming in at number 8, we have the tragic death of Mary Jane Watson in the Spider-Man Reign storyline. In this alternate universe, an elderly Peter Parker gave up being Spider-Man decades ago, and has since let New York devolve into a dystopian police state, with supervillains being led by the city's mayor. The reason for this old Spider-Man's lack of action is unfortunately heartbreaking, with the love of his life, Mary Jane, having succumbed to cancer after too many years caring for a radioactive husband. And while eventually Peter finds redemption and takes back the city, it still goes to show how dark a world without Spider-Man can be. At number 7, we have Man-Spider, the horrific result of what would happen to Peter Parker if he was a bit more spider and a little less man. Man-Spider first appeared when Angel from the X-Men and Peter Parker were both captured by the villain Brainchild within the prehistoric Savage Lands. Brainchild's plan was to devolve his enemies into more primordial forms, and this left Spider-Man with a hideous appearance, even more limbs than usual, and an unstoppable murderous hunger. While he was eventually able to regain his human form without doing too much damage, every time a villain alters Peter's genetics to favor his spider side has led to massive amounts of internal strife and hunger for human flesh. Speaking of which, number 6 has us talking about the Peter Parker from the Marvel Zombies universe, and this guy's got even more of a thing for eating people than our last number. Zombie Spider-Man unfortunately was infected early on when his world began to fall to the zombie plague, bitten by a half-decapitated Captain America. Before he even really knew what was happening, this version of Spider-Man had consumed the brains of his beloved Aunt May, Mary Jane, and even J. Jonah Jameson. While still retaining most of his personality, this version of Spider-Man was motivated entirely by hunger, to the degree that he even joined in a superpowered mob to topple and devour Galactus when he visited the zombified world. Not exactly the most polite table manners, my dude. Coming in at number 5, we have none other than the Assassin Spider-Man of Earth 8351. Over the years, Spider-Man's had many different kinds of web shooters, from homemade mechanical ones to the biological ones of the Sam Raimi films, but this is probably the only version of Spider-Man where the web shooter is just a shooter, meaning it's literally just a gun. Yes, believe it or not, there's a Spider-Man that just shoots people instead of web slinging. Having abandoned New York in his own universe to become an international assassin alongside of Wolverine, this Spider-Man has entirely given up on great responsibility and seeks only to make a living far, far away from the family he left behind. At number 4, we have perhaps the most well-known occasion where Spider-Man was a villain, because he literally had a villain inside his head. That's right, it's the Superior Spider-Man. After many years of being arch rivals, Spider-Man was seemingly defeated by Dr. Otto Octavius when the dying supervillain swapped their consciousness around, leaving Peter Parker to seemingly die in the frail villain's body. While Otto was motivated by the desire to be a better, aka superior Spider-Man, his violent tactics and invasive use of Spider-Bot technology were frowned upon by most every other hero, and it was only after surrendering Peter's body back that Octavius would admit that Parker was the actual superior Spider-Man all along. Coming in at number 3, we've got the evil CEO Peter Parker from the video game Spider-Man: Edge of Time. We've been counting through a list of times that Spider-Man has changed or used his superpowers for evil throughout the multiverse, but this incarnation proves that even Spidey's alter ego can go very, very bad. After losing many of his loved ones in this universe, Peter became CEO of the Alchemax Corporation, determined to use his scientific knowledge and time travel to prevent anyone he loves from being hurt ever again in any timeline, no matter what the cost. This version of Peter has also twisted his uncle's beloved words, using the mantra, "With great powers comes great responsibility and great opportunity, and the only way to live up to all that responsibility is to use every opportunity to get all the power." At number 2, we've got Spider-Carnage, best known from Spider-Man the Animated Series, and perhaps the single deadliest multiverse variant of Peter Parker we've yet to see from Marvel. In a world where Peter had an even rougher life, with Aunt May passing away shortly after his Uncle Ben, this Peter was manipulated and abused by the cloning supervillain the Jackal into believing he was not the real Peter Parker. This mental instability was made even worse by the appearance of a Carnage symbiote from another dimension, which latched onto this Spider-Man's confusion and hatred to create Spider-Carnage, a being with endless, insane rage, but also the intellect of a genius. Spider-Carnage's one goal was to bring about an end to all possible realities, something even Thanos wouldn't consider attempting, and he was only able to be defeated by multiple Spider-Men working together to defeat their twisted variant. Finally, at number 1, we've got the death of Uncle Ben, which is perhaps the defining moment in all of Spider-Man's career. Now, I know it may be a little controversial to choose something from Spidey's origin story as the number 1 pick, especially considering how many evil multiverse stories there are, but in my opinion, one of the best aspects of Spider-Man is that he isn't perfect. Sometimes he makes mistakes, even bad ones, and it's how he reacts and learns from these mistakes that make him such a great hero. When Peter first gets his powers, he initially just wants to become famous with them, and winds up letting a thief go when his wrestling gig is barged in on. It's this thief going on to kill Uncle Ben, and Peter's realization of how badly he screwed up, that fully cements in him that with great power comes great responsibility. You don't even have a single Spider-Man story if you don't have this one villainous moment from Peter, one that he's still trying to make up for to this day, and that, in my opinion, is why it comes out on top.
And at 10, Peter Parker. With Miles having all the powers of Spider-Man with a couple extra to boot, it's bound to be expected that he would eventually surpass his idol/mentor Peter Parker. However, we expected it after some training and a lot of experience. We see this come to pass though in the pages of Spider-Man. Miles and Peter run into each other in costume and they don't know each other's identity. So Pete demands that Miles unmask himself and, state his name. However, they get into a bit of an altercation because of that. And thanks to the help of a few additions Miles made to his suit, including stingers that cause paralysis and electrified webbing, Miles does end up gaining the upper hand and knocking Peter down. Which I have to say shouldn't really have been the case. Like, they should have shown us that the more experienced Spider-Man could still win, since experience is the real currency of the world, but nonetheless, it happened, so it goes on the list. And at 9, Deadpool. Deadpool is such a charismatic character that you'd think he'd pair perfectly with the quick-witted, constantly quipping Webhead. However, in one episode of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Peter was introduced to the one and only Wade Wilson, the merc with a red leather covered mouth. Kinky. The fight quickly turns into Peter and Wade literally slapping each other, so it's safe to say that this is bound to be interesting. However, Deadpool somehow pulls Peter into his mind, turning the fights from a fisticuffs to Deadpool hunting a Spider-Man whale with a harpoon, a la Lewis Brinley, and getting trampled with giant animals and verbal puns that caused physical harm. Deadpool is literally a bard using vicious mockery in this scene, and I don't think that anyone can fight me on that point. Straight up, this whole episode is hilarious, and the fact that Deadpool can't say the word kill just makes me think about YouTube censors. So it's relatable too. And at 8, Fantastic Four. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 1, we get thrown right into the action with a crossover with the Fantastic Four. But not a fantastic crossover, since the group was actually in the midst of fighting Spider-Man. Spidey took on all 4 members at once, webbing them all up in a way that disabled their powers, including basically hog-tying Mr. Fantastic. The thing is, no pun intended, this fight was all Spider-Man's fault. He wanted to join the Fantastic Four, and figured the best way to convince them to let that happen was to infiltrate their base and kick their asses. However, he learns that joining the team won't actually make him any money, so he called them cheap and leaves, which I find utterly hilarious. He hit the Human Torch with a baseball bat made of web, for crying out loud. How is a 5th member supposed to join the Fantastic Four? Wouldn't it be like the Fantastic Five at that point? Or is Ben getting kicked out? He can go be somebody's pet rock, right? And at 7, Iron Man. Iron Man and Spider-Man may have a father-stepson-like bond in the MCU, however, things in the comments are much more professional than that, aside from the Iron Spider storyline, I guess. There are multiple instances of Iron Man and Spider-Man fighting and Peter coming out on top, like in Amazing Spider-Man number 536, where he had some assistance from the Venom symbiote and actually exploded the Iron Man suit from the inside out. This was during the Civil War storyline where Tony believed that heroes needed to register their secret identities to be able to continue fighting. After this, however, Spidey does join Iron Man's team and reveals his identity as a result. This then leads to the One More Day storyline that some people believe to be the story No Way Home is inspired by. However, now Spidey takes on Iron Man as Peter Parker, using his organic webbing to string him up real good. There was also the Amazing Spider-Man number 588 fight where Tony shuts down the Iron Spider suit with a voice command, but Peter had built in a counter voice command and surprises Tony, managing to web him up and flee. The counter voice command, I guess, was also surprised. So that's pretty funny. And at 6, X-Men. This is certainly another interesting number, since Spider-Man had struggled against singular X-Men before, such as Nightcrawler and Wolverine. However, in the Secret Wars storyline, he took on the whole X-Men team at once and won. In Secret Wars number 3, Spider-Man was eavesdropping on the X-Men to learn their plans. When he heard meeting with Magneto among other things, he decided to drop in and say hi. I guess his body and powers just go into overdrive when he fights teams because, just like with the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man was easily able to dodge Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and more, even though he struggled one-on-one. He really wrecked them, webbing Colossus and Nightcrawler, hanging rogue from the ceiling, and just obliterating the entire team. Even Wolverine pointed out that they were all lucky all he wanted was information and then an escape, because, quote, he really clobbered us. Halfway through in at number 5, Captain America. Within the pages of Civil War II, we expected a battle much like the last Civil War, with moral alignments being similar, along with a couple deaths. However, we were shocked when a battle between heroes was interrupted. This vision that took us away from the action actually ended with an image of Miles Morales holding a dead Captain America. It seemed to be that Miles had also killed him, with blood dripping out of his hand and covering his suit. Would this really come to pass though? Civil War II was based on the belief in using the visions of an inhuman known as Ulysses to prevent disasters before they occurred, and heroes that felt taking action based on these prophecies were irresponsible, which is where this vision of Miles killing Cap came from, since these visions resulted in preventing multiple tragedies but also got War Machine and Hulk killed. But we did see an explanation play out in Secret Empire number 7, when a rage-filled Spider-Man nearly beat Captain America, who was remade by Hydra using the Cosmic Cube, to death after Cap had killed Black Widow. But that's all in the past. 5 years in the past to be exact. In it for Wonder Woman. Despite Marvel and DC always being viewed as rivals, they have had multiple occasions where they've had to come together. One such time was in the Superman and Spider-Man comic, which saw the two heroes join together to take on Dr. Doom. The Hulk and Wonder Woman also made an appearance in an attempt to satisfy more fans, and so we could hope that Superman and Hulk would dish it out. However, Dr. Doom very briefly got Spider-Man and Wonder Woman to fight because he said the two were enemies. And while Wonder Woman believed him, Spidey is from this universe, so he knows better than to take Dr. Doom at his word. So Diana tried to capture the bug in her net, which in this case is a giant lasso that makes you tell the truth. But Spider-Man ended up gaining the advantage by simply turning off the lights and letting his Spidey sense do the work, after dodging the lasso quite a bit, might I add. Spider-Man ended the fight by simply tapping her on her shoulder and basically saying, "See, I could kick ass right now, but I'm not. I'm one of the good guys." And that was enough for Diana to stand down, apparently. Getting close to the end in number 3, Hulk. Usually when Spidey fights someone stronger or more powerful than himself, he needs to think on his feet and outsmart them in some way. And you think that would be easy with the Hulk, given that he's just a giant brute with anger issues. But actually, that's not how this one played out at all. In True Believers Spider-Man vs. the Hulk number 1, Hulk challenged Spider-Man at a horrible time. At least, horrible time for the Hulk. Since Spider-Man had just acquired a new set of abilities which increased his strength, speed, and gave him the ability to go airborne without webs. Spider-Man at this point was actually stronger than the Hulk, so he was trying to avoid a fact for lack of causing permanent damage. Unaliving him, if you will. But when Hulk started to endanger nearby kids, Spider-Man punched him and literally sent him into space. Since he was outside Earth's atmosphere, Spider-Man realized that he wasn't coming back down and flew up to help him, bringing him back down to Earth where he could breathe and not, freeze to death. It's pretty hardcore. Penultimately, in at number 2, Superboy. Marvel vs. DC is one of the best crossovers when looking at these lists. The fights from that crossover were decided by votes, so with Spider-Man being the most popular character Marvel has ever released, you can be sure that he'd end up winning against Superboy, despite the potentially unrealistic scenario that caused. However, it was explained away pretty easily when Superboy broke a water tower and flooded the roof they were fighting on. All it took after that was a conveniently placed high voltage box and some crashing to end the fight for Superboy. I don't know if Spider-Man was aware of this vulnerability, but either way, it went how it went. It also feels like I should mention that the Spider-Man fighting Superboy was Ben Reilly, the Spider-Man clone who goes on to become the Scarlet Spider. And DC fans don't seem to like it when you bring up this fight, with multiple users on a certain forum telling someone who mentioned it to jump on a bed of nails, which I have to say, I've heard better insults, come on. Finally, in at number 1, Silver Surfer. Sure, Hulk is strong and Superboy is part Kryptonian, but Silver Surfer is literally a cosmic being, a herald of Galactus. This man is nuts. And while yes, the fight with him may not really have been there overall, Spidey still technically came out on top, and that's what matters. In Silver Surfer number 14, the flying second place Emmy had a crossover encounter with Spider-Man while surfing over the city, and cause plot to make characters fight, a misunderstanding ensued. So Spidey immediately attacked the Silver Surfer. Let's be honest, on a good day, Surfer would usually just obliterate Spider-Man no problem, or just like flick him and he'd be fine. But on this occasion, the Surfer was actually already weak from a previous encounter, and on top of that, he just didn't want to fight. The Silver Surfer repeatedly tried to avoid battling Spider-Man and even saved Spidey from falling off a building, but Spider-Man wouldn't let up, knocking the Surfer off his board and taking the fight to him on the rooftops. Silver Surfer finally just got fed up with the violence and then made a decision to retreat, but first had to save a child who had taken his board. I mean, like, come on, you could have at least given the kid a few minutes. Him saving the kid is what finally clued Spider-Man in that the Surfer was a good guy, but technically, Spidey wins by default. He didn't die, so that's a win to me. That's what matters.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Souvenir Symbiote. So during the events of 1984's Secret Wars, Spidey came across a symbiote while on Battleworld. In issue 7, Spider-Woman makes her grand entrance, and Peter Parker reacts in his usual manner. I mean, one of his first thoughts is to sue her for infringing on his shtick, but he clocks that she just tossed a boulder as easily as he could, so maybe there's more behind her than meets the eye. In the next issue, he gets an up-close personal look at this new black suit Spider-Woman was rocking. And now we have a new costume for Spidey. And he loves it. He feels stronger, he feels quicker, and he's even impressed by the mechanics of the suit's ability to change. So while it all seemed like the perfect aid in this massive battle, Peter questioned why his new suit was so different after all. Oh well, he says, and then he returns to Earth with his new suit that just happens to activate his Spidey sense. And we all know that there was much more to this suit than we thought. You gotta leave things where you find them, Pete. You never know, they might just be, I don't know, an alien race. And before we go on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a like on this video because it helps the channel out a lot over here. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to some more Spider-Man mistakes. Number 9, I am Spider-Man? Yeah, super identities are meant to be super secret, okay? So when Tony Stark announced that he was Iron Man on the big screen, I mean, sure, it was a cool moment, but since then, there have been numerous people trying to take him down. During the events of Civil War issue 2, Spider-Man decides to take a page out of Tony's book and announces to the world who the web-slinger really was. So later on, we see a bullet that was aiming for MJ, but ended up hitting Aunt May instead, resulting in one of the best Spider-Man arcs ever, the Back in Black storyline. So while it's cool to see Peter rage out and get payback wearing nothing but a polo and cool pants, all that pain could have been avoided if you just kept your mask on and your mouth shut. Number 8, the deal with the devil. Next up on our list, we have One More Day. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. We see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil, Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, that bullet hit Aunt May, which I just talked about, but that's not the end of it. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying from said bullet. So MJ adds to this massive pitch. So basically what ends up happening is that the world will forget about Peter's identity. Aunt May will live, but in order for that to happen, MJ and Peter never got married. Kind of like in Shrek 4, for all the 9 people that watched Shrek 4. So they hug one final time and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it. And that fast, all that backstory was just wiped out at the turn of one page. And readers at this point were also forced to suffer and join alongside this horrible end to this horrible deal. Number 7, homesick. So now is a time more than ever when we have to be careful about spreading any virus, right? So you would think when Peter gets bitten during, say, I don't know, a zombie apocalypse, he would stay as far away from his loved ones as possible. In Marvel's Zombies Army of Darkness, we see our heroes run into Ash Williams, traveler between worlds. And he's arrived with the Necronomicon, warning him that the army of the dead will rise in this world. So Peter sees this firsthand beside Ash, and he decides he's not going to let any more innocents die on his watch. And then in the next issue, after being bit himself, Peter pretends to munch on Hawkeye's brains before making a daring escape. Not a bad idea. So he gets Ash to safety, explaining why he's still a human being. And then Spidey decided to go home and make sure that May and MJ were okay with this bite and first-hand experience as to what happens. And Peter's newfound appetite starts to kick in. You should have stayed away, Peter. This went from bad to worse real quick. Number 6, not worth the fight. So we have Peter Parker, but this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe, which is my personal favorite. Wonder why. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. And at the start of this issue, he reflects on how much he loved his newborn daughter, saying he wanted to spend every waking moment with her and MJ. But he had other responsibilities. At least he thought he did. His words, not mine. So when May was 2 years old, he got into a fight with the Green Goblin and ended up losing a leg because of it, ending his days as the web slinger. Now it's great in one way because we get to see May Parker rise to the occasion and put on the suit herself, and she's totally badass while she does it. But to think how differently their lives would have been had Peter have just retired and, I don't know, focused on his family, it would have been a lot different. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Let's just hope she comes across a, I don't know, leg dealer. Number 5, too much fun. I mean, sure, saving people can be a blast, swinging through the air, doing flips, talking the entire time to bad guys, but when you find yourself totally comfortable in any job, that's when mistakes happen, when you're not paying full attention. And we see this unfold in a brutal way in Spider-Man issue 17, titled At the Hands of Thanos. So he's going over the mental checklist of things to do in his Spider-Man day, like pick up Mary Jane, and no, not that kind. Fill up on web fluid, you know, usual Spidey stuff. When suddenly a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that this is just another walk in the park for him. He saves them, but the cooling machine falls and then explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air, killing Peter Parker. Now, believe me, that sounds terrible and all, but it gets worse. Yeah. Death isn't the end, and especially in the world where Thanos is around. He meets Peter in the afterlife and makes him watch as a mother yells in agony over the loss of her child during that same explosion. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the woman and her daughter, but he didn't even save the kid. I mean, maybe if you weren't so focused on the barbecue sauce, things would have turned out differently. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know. Number 4, a helping hand. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers help during a project. I mean, giving them a hand though, literally, could end up pretty bad. So in the comics, Dr. Curt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion during a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. And as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors becomes a lizard man. And no, not like a lizard man. He becomes a lizard man. Like he's a giant lizard. Sorry, what happened? I mean, sure, lizards can grow back their tails easily, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage, the brain can alter as well. So his story arc begins with the Amazing Spider-Man 6, if you want to see that nightmare take place. Number 3, silence is golden. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question, because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's attracted to her, and she digs the webhead as well. I mean, look at him, who doesn't? All that confidence, all that lankiness, you gotta. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's actually less interested. Come on, Pete, you gotta play it cool. Be that mysterious guy. Number 2, the spider or the man. We now go to Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963. The issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them off your hands gladly if you wanna just, you know, toss those to the side, sure. So he thinks it's a great idea to drink the solution that he's had that would get rid of his superpowers. You know, just in case you wanted to, I don't know, get rid of superpowers for some reason. For Gwen, he says, before downing the mix. And as you could have guessed, it doesn't work at all. Well, kind of. I mean, he grows 4 extra arms, so, you know, take that what you will. Not like this, he says. Oh yeah, homemade vaccine for the win. And finally, number 1, not my problem. In a list full of mistakes, I think it's only fair to end on the mistake that haunts Peter the most. After letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his Uncle Ben's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this tremendous loss, especially not having parents in the first place, but he was responsible for letting this thug get away, and he honestly just let it happen. And it all takes place in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. Oh yeah, we see this mess go down right here. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds in a sassy way with, "Sorry, pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1. That means me." Sounds like a great plan, Pete. So how did that end up again? Kicking off the list at number 10, Sins Past. This 5-part storyline revealed that Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn had an affair. Yeah, you heard me. To 2 children named Gabriel and Sarah. This one upset comic book fans quite a bit. So in the Amazing Spider-Man number 509, Peter gets this letter, right? And the letter is supposedly from a dead Gwen Stacy. Yeah, she's dead and it's a letter. The dead letter. Deader. I can't think of a pun there. That's a first. So Peter does a little detective work and runs some DNA tests on the letter. And he comes to find out that Gwen Stacy had actually given birth to twins. Her DNA was on the letter. This is happening. Mary Jane finally ends up filling Peter in on this dark secret, that Gwen Stacy had a secret affair with Norman Osborn 7 months before she died. Mary Jane even had a conversation with Norman about it, and she said she doesn't want Norman to take care of the kids, or else they're just gonna end up turning into another version of Harry Osborn. I mean, you got a point. Right off the bat though, Norman's exposure to the Green Goblin formula caused these kids to be born early, and they came out fully grown, and we see that in the comic. Also, ouch. Number 9, Amazing Spider-Man 100. Hey, it's Spider-Man, but he has 6 arms. Well, that's what happens when you ingest a chemical that's meant to neutralize your powers. Okay, well, as we see in almost every comic book ever, it doesn't go as planned. He grows 4 extra arms, having 6 in total. Yeah, 6 in total. Got it. I'm good. The only way to save this Spider-Man's dilemma is Michael Morbius's blood. So the 6-armed Spider-Man, or also known as the Man-Spider, which is pretty fitting at this point. Man-Spider is gross too. Like, imagine waking up and there's just Peter Parker with all those legs. Like, hey, you thirsty? I'd be like, you stop. He kind of reminds me of a champ. I mean, it's always nice to see your favorite hero get an upgrade, but sometimes it's a bit too weird. I don't know. Like, imagine if he had 6 arms in the movies. Like, that's so much sweat. He'd be fighting bad guys and kicking ass, but he would be so exhausted. That's 6 arms that he has to swing constantly. There'd be so much sweat. It would look like a Sprite commercial. People just dripping. I'm here for it. I kind of like it. I wish he stayed like that. He didn't, but I kind of wish he did. Number 8, Ultimate Spider-Man 66. So when you think of 2 superheroes swapping bodies, you think, oh, that must be entertaining. I mean, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer wasn't a great film by any means, but that concept was still pretty fun to play with. Well, with Spider-Man and Wolverine swapping bodies in Ultimate Spider-Man, things get weird. Very weird. So after Ultimate Spider-Man issue 66, Wolverine is now a total creep, more so than before. Now here's what happened. Mesmero switched their bodies up, so Peter was like, hey man, I really need you to go to school. Like, you are 15, we have to go, this is an important thing. So while Wolverine is in Peter's body, he at one point ends up kissing Mary Jane, and he even tried to sleep with her. And cue the jail. Is there a jail we can put this guy in? Let's put him in jail right now. Apparently all those walks to school in the morning made him realize that she truly is awesome. I mean, we always knew that, but he might have not. MJ told him that she wants to wait until they're older for that kind of thing, you know, that kind of thing. So thankfully, nothing happened. But this was for sure an issue or 2 we could have gone without. Trying to get that thought out of my brain. Find somebody your own age. Number 7, Toxic Love. Spider-Man Reign was issued in 2006 and it was quite interesting. So the 4-part story begins with an old Peter Parker, and many fans compared it to The Dark Knight Returns. Similar vibes for sure. Only difference is that in this story we have visions of a dead Mary Jane, and it's very disgusting. Sad old Peter Parker, no thank you. Plus, to make matters worse, so much worse, he actually caused her death in this issue. Yeah, how you ask? Well, his web shooter ended up giving Mary Jane cancer. And by web shooter I mean his, how do I say this? This is so weird. Number 6, Amazing Spider-Man 386. This one is neat. So right on the cover of this one, we see the text, the most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue. And I'd say that I agree with that. Peter's parents returned. Hooray! So in issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm just in the kitchen with some new guests. And Peter's like, whoa, guests? Huh, I love guests. I wonder who it is. Are those my parents? Yes, only they were evil androids. Fun, I guess. So his parents were actually robots and they were feeding back intel about Peter back to Chameleon. So they were just lying to Peter, obviously, and they explained that they didn't die because they were putting in motion this secret government plan, even saying they were in a Russian prison camp for 20 years. I mean, sure, we'll believe that, I guess, if we have to. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin, who already knew Spider-Man's secret identity, so what's the point? We don't know. Number 5, Spider-Man 3. Yeah, I'm going to the film category for this one because I gotta get this one off my chest. Spider-Man 2 is arguably one of the best superhero movies ever. Not even just Spider-Man movies, like as a superhero movie, this kicked ass, in my ever so humble opinion. Then Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, everyone's like, yeah, here we go. Trilogies, they rock. And suddenly no one gave a shit about Spider-Man anymore. Including the people who apparently made the movie, I don't know. Venom was absolutely butchered. Sandman retconned the entire first movie's main driving force to make Peter Parker become Spider-Man, changing the whole Uncle Ben dying situation. Great. The movie itself just had a weird tone. Like, I felt like I was watching 3 different Spider-Man movies at the same time, and all 3 of them had this different direction, and they just weren't complete, and they just jammed it all into one movie. Like, I love Sam Raimi, but the dancing scene, we didn't need that. We didn't need that. I mean, thank you for the thousands of memes. You've definitely supplied us some comedy, but I'm really hoping this other Spider-Man 3 with Tom Holland doesn't go this route. They already have too much on their plate, I think, for this one movie. I mean, Sinister Six being rumored to be in the movie, and then all these other Spider-Man actors returning. Don't get greedy. Just let it Go, let it go organically. We sat through Iron Man 3. We're gonna sit through 5 more Spider-Man movies if we have to. Take your time. Don't mess it up. Number 4, Spectacular Spider-Man 12. Okay, so back in 1976, we got to see a redneck superhero. And I wish I was joking. Kinda. Do I? I don't know. Spectacular Spider-Man issue 12 opens with Peter having a nice game of tennis with Flash Thompson. And then in comes trouble. Trouble in the shape of Brother Power and Sister Sun. And one thing leads to another and they join hands, and of course now they can shoot beams out of their chest, like Care Bear style. And then in comes Razorback, the superhero who speaks like Ruth Langmore with that southern twang. Sorry, I'm gonna offend so many people with this one. Here we go. That southern twang. And to make matters even more weird, he looks like a pig, like that's the outfit that he went with. I hope I never see this guy in a Spider-Man movie. Or if I do, I'm playing him. I'm gonna be like, what you doing up there, sticky boy? Number 3, Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 2. Issue 16, that is. This one I wish I could forget existed. Leave my brain, go, just get out of here. So we've seen Peter Parker change with his powers. I mean, he doesn't need the glasses, he gets some abs, starts getting ripped, whatever, yada yada yada. But how about becoming an actual spider and laying eggs? So after a not so chill run-in with the Spider Queen, she injects some pretty nasty goop into Peter Parker. And then the next thing you know, Peter has like 2 extra eyes. And if that wasn't enough for you to feel sick to your stomach, he ends up becoming an actual spider and gives birth to Peter Parker. Okay. Ew, first of all, Peter comes out looking the exact same. I mean, he's naked and shredded. Awesome. So the point of this is useless, I guess. I mean, he's reborn with organic web shooting abilities, which I didn't like. Made me feel gross. Like in the first movie when you see him, it's like, what does that feel like coming out? Ah, it can't be pleasant. Probably like noodles, just noodles flying out of your veins. That's the grossest thing I've said on this channel. My favorite part has to be when he attends a Star Trek themed wedding, because those exist, and his disguise just happens to be perfect to mask what's going on in his life. Number 2, Attack of the Clones. No, not that one. The Clone Saga is one of the worst parts of the Spider-Man universe. Spider-Man far too long, rather. The story itself was a chore to keep up with fans. Characters coming back to life and dying again, it almost felt like a waste of time. Well, it definitely felt like a waste of time. The whole time you didn't know who the real Spider-Man was, but the story was so jam-packed full of this nonsense that it honestly got lost in this rubbish story. We didn't know if Peter or Ben was the clone, and they just kept dragging this one idea on, and in the end, it doesn't even matter. Linkin Park. And finally, for number 1 on our list, One More Day. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. Love it, gotta love it. So of course that adds to the mix already with a not so well revived story. Okay, so the story begins in 2007 in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. And instead of the usual thugs or the enhanced scientist villain that Spider-Man usually faces, he makes a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course knew who he was, and now they're after him knowing his true identity, right? People want this guy dead, a lot of them. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he is to blame. So first, he goes to Iron Man to give him being the one who basically convinced Peter to reveal his identity. So he webs him up and gets all bad cop. It's actually pretty wild. So he talks to MJ in the next issue and explains how that bullet was meant for him. It's consuming him. Peter is feeling this guilt. Mephisto has entered the chat. Yeah, the devil shows up, offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to this deal. She pitches basically the world will forget about Spider-Man's identity. Aunt May will live, but MJ and Peter will have never gotten married. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then, poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it. And then that fast, all of that backstory was just gone. And fans weren't having it.
Obviously, we have to start off this list with a classic. Introduced in 1989's What If Volume 2 Number 4, we're given a glimpse into the life of Earth 1089's Peter Parker after his suit bonded with the Venom symbiote. In this reality, the symbiote couldn't be removed from Peter Parker, even though the Fantastic Four and other heroes tried using a combination of magic and science. It ended up taking over Peter's mind and body, feeding off his adrenaline, causing him to age at a very rapid rate. Once his body couldn't sustain the symbiote any longer, it used him to possess superheroes like Hulk and even caused the death of a few others. Free from the symbiote's control, it's then revealed that Peter Parker has now aged to 85 with not a whole lot of time left. He was later found dead by Mr. Fantastic, surrounded by research on how to kill the symbiote, that he was once bonded to. Although it was out of his control, symbiote Spider-Man was considered even worse than Venom, one of the most sadistic villains in the Marvel Universe, and unfortunately he never really got that redemption. Number 9. Peter Parker, Earth 9591. Now we're all familiar with the origin story of Peter Parker, you know, spider bite leads to powers, leads to the birth of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but have you ever wondered what it would look like if things took a bit of a different turn after that spider bite? Well, wonder no longer, because the 1995's Ruin number 2, we're actually introduced to a different Peter Parker who isn't so lucky. After being bitten by the radioactive spider, Peter develops a total of 0 powers and is instead infected with a mutant virus that ultimately leads to his death. This Earth never gets the chance to meet the hero Spider-Man, and instead they're given a rash and scar-covered Peter Parker who was forced to live the remainder of his life in quarantine so he wouldn't infect anyone else. You know, I always wondered what would happen like realistically after that spider bite, but man, I really didn't think it would be that dark. Number 8. Ghost Spider. Now, this is one of my favorite costumes in the Spider-Man PS4 game, so you know I had to add it to the list. On Earth 11,638, Peter's Uncle Ben wasn't ever murdered and actually helped him hone his skills as the Amazing Spider. Despite this, he doesn't always use his abilities and intellect for good, and thanks to the resources from his lab, Parker Technologies, the Amazing Spider found a way to bring over other Spider-Men from different universes and absorb their powers. After bringing Earth 616 Peter Parker into his universe, the Spider is convinced by him that what he's been doing isn't heroic at all. Then, when Ben is about to absorb Earth 616 Peter's powers, we see the Spider stand in the way and instead had his powers absorbed, putting his body into a comatose state and trapping his spirit in hell. Following the Sorcerer Supreme's fight with the Infernal Hulk, we see Peter given a second chance at life after he was infused with the spirits and powers of the repentant damned. Now possessing powers similar to Ghost Rider along with his Spidey powers, he awakes from his coma as the Ghost Spider and uses his second chance to correct some of the mistakes he's made already. Check him out in his first appearance in 2011's Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 38. Number 7. Superior Spider-Man. Following an insane life that deserves a read if you're not familiar with it already, Otto Octavius transplanted his mind into the body of Peter Parker, leaving Peter in his body. Still retaining Peter's memories, he was able to trick all of Peter's loved ones into thinking nothing was wrong. Otto believed that he could be a better Spider-Man and, following the death of Peter Parker, took up the role as the Superior Spider-Man, upgrading the spider suit to better fit his needs. Many battles ensued, and then it's revealed along the way that Peter's consciousness still lived on inside his body, and after the Goblin King kidnapped Anna Maria, Otto's love interest while in Peter's body, Otto begins to hesitate to save others as he has a chance to save her and doubts he can save everyone without having time to plan. Peter's consciousness pushes him to save the child who is also in danger at the same time, and Otto realizes that Peter is more deserving of the role of Spider-Man and completely erases his consciousness so that Peter can take control of his body once more and save everyone. He sacrificed himself for the girl he loved and the man he hated for the greater good, and that just goes to show you that even if you start off as a villain, you can change and become a hero. Now there's a lot more to the story that I had to gloss over or skip, so I highly recommend you check out the story for yourself, starting with The Amazing Spider-Man number 697. Number 6. Doppelganger. The evil, pretty much mindless duplicate of Spider-Man from Earth 616, this version of Spider-Man was created by Magus during the Infinity War. Although he was killed during the Infinity War, this 6-armed Spidey clone was later revived by the Goblin, becoming its pet for a while. Doppelganger appears a few more times after the aftermath of the Infinity War, teaming up with Carnage, Shriek, Carrion, and the Goblin during the infamous Maximum Carnage killing spree, and then is later seen as part of the Spider Army to help defeat Morlun and the other inheritors. Unfortunately for him, after many adventures, the Doppelganger was eventually captured and imprisoned in the rebuilt Ravencroft. Possessing many of the same powers as the original Spider-Man, what really sets Doppelganger apart is his raw strength. Being able to lift up to 25 tons as opposed to the normal 10 that most other Spider heroes can lift. Why not check him out for yourself in Infinity War number 1. Number 5. Pestilence. In 2005's Cable and Deadpool number 15, we see Deadpool dropped in Earth 5701, while on a search for Cable where the supervillain Apocalypse has conquered New York and then changed 4 superheroes into his horsemen, one being the Spider-Man of this world. Alongside Famine, who's the Blob, Death, who is Archangel, and an alternate Cable known as War, they all serve under Apocalypse and aim to protect him at all costs. Now known as Pestilence, this 4-armed and 4-legged version of Spider-Man is not one you want to get close to, especially when you learn about his poisonous fangs and his hunger for human bones. Check him out for yourself and let me know what you think in the comments below. Number 4. The Other. In the 2005-2006 storyline of the same title, we see Spider-Man begin a transformation to his wild side. Peter began having these strange symptoms and dreams of Uncle Ben and spiders. Thinking he might be dying, Peter threw himself more and more into his crime fighting, especially against the scientific vampire known as Morlun, as Morlun wreaked havoc by beating Spider-Man so badly that he ended up in the hospital, and also by smacking Mary Jane around. Peter got to the point where he just couldn't take it anymore and reached his limits. In 2006 Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 3, we see Spider-Man pin Morlun down and kill him with a bite to the head. After what we all assume was Peter's death, we see Peter erupt from a cocoon with new powers and a newfound dedication to embracing his spider side that he refers to as the Other. Even though he embraced his dark side for a while, he does eventually come back to his senses and becomes the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man once more. Number 3. Patton Parnell. Definitely one of the scariest looking Spider-Men, Patton Parnell has been described as a sociopathic version of Spider-Man who made the exact opposite decisions that Peter had. Growing up with an abusive uncle, Uncle Ted, Parnell was always a bit of a weird one as he found joy in experimenting on animals and perversely spying on his next door neighbor Sarah Jane. Like other Spider-Men, Patton was bit by a spider, however, his body's reaction to it was a little bit different. Instead of turning into a superhero, he actually gained the ability to turn into a spider-like monster and started to seek revenge on those who had treated him poorly, starting with his uncle. He eventually leads Sarah Jane to his house and reveals his new form to her, and needless to say, she was terrified and not at all impressed. And then after a bite to the neck, the next morning we see hundreds of baby spiders coming out of Sarah Jane's neck. Thankfully, Parnell doesn't stick around for too long, as just after 3 days of having his power, he is drained of all his life force by Morlun. Check out this twisted story in 2014's Edge of Spider-Verse number 4. Number 2. The Spider. Showcased in the Exiles series, we're introduced to one of the darkest Spider-Men to date. On Earth 15, Peter Parker was a sociopathic mass murderer who was sentenced to 67 consecutive life sentences and merged with the Carnage symbiote before being recruited by the Timebreakers into the Weapon X team. Using none of his powers for good, the Spider joined the other members of the team to try to conquer the Earth instead of actually helping them, finding nothing but joy in killing and torturing. It took a blast from Firestar to end his reign of terror alongside the other rebels. What makes this version of Spider-Man so terrifying is that he's one of the few Spideys who actually keeps the symbiote his entire career. With the symbiote's powers combined with Peter's evil rage, this puts the Spider at the same power level as Carnage at his strongest point, making him a truly frightening foe. Why not check him out for yourself in 2002's Exiles number 12 so you can see just how truly merciless this killer is. Number 1. Zombie Spider-Man. Now, not a whole lot is known about Earth 2149 Peter Parker's life before the zombie apocalypse, but it's presumed that it was similar to his 616 counterpart. On his search for the Necronomicon, the presumed source of the zombie infection, Peter ends up getting bit by Colonel America, who is a zombie at the time, and becomes infected. With his mind still relatively human, he hurries home to try and get his Aunt May and Mary Jane to safety. However, with the virus spreading quickly through his body, he winds up killing and eating them both. Alongside the other superpowered zombies, they ate almost all life on Earth until they ate Galactus, which granted them all the powers of the Power Cosmic, which they used to travel the universe, eating other worlds in their endless search for more food. After 40 years of eating worlds, they finally returned to Earth, still hungry to find Reed Richards' dimensional portal so they could finally continue their quest. However, Spidey noticed that his hunger was completely gone. Regaining his sense of justice, Spidey alongside some other good zombies found themselves locked in a battle with the other zombie heroes, trying their very hardest to convince them that their hunger was also gone and they could become heroes once again. Now, there is a whole lot more to the story of Spider-Man, and I could honestly talk about it for hours. This entire zombie universe is amazing. So if you're interested in hearing the rest of the Spidey's redemption story, why not let me know in the comments below and maybe we'll dedicate an entire video to it. If you want to read the story for yourself, why not check it out in Ultimate Fantastic Four number 22 and Marvel Zombies vs. Army of Darkness number 1.